Nelson, obviously. So it's no reflection on the other great acoustic spaces, but we have this chance. And it's wonderful to have such support behind it to build something visionary for all of this country.
Oh, good on you, Peter.
Very diplomatic of you, Peter. Well handled. Spreading the love.
Lovely. That's the NZSO Chief Executive, Peter Biggs. Gosh, you've got my memory running there, Johnny. A wonderful Saturday morning, picking up the violin, scratching through a lesson, going across the road, having a tip-top or a rocky road, and you're in the Nelson sunshine. What a place to live, huh?
It certainly is, and we really are blessed with some amazing arts institutions. Scorch is one of them, Theatre Royal was another. We're very, very lucky.
Indeed, the Theatre Royal as well, indeed.
Yep.
And let's not forget the wonderful Otatahi Christchurch. You both are very lucky living in some wonderful places. And I think that's the panel. Very good. Jenny, Johnny, kia ora. Thank you for both being with me. A lot of response this afternoon. We'll come back to some of those issues. I am Wallace Chapman, back when the horns blow, 3:45, you know the time. Meanwhile, it is Checkpoint now with Lisa Owen, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the government's budget slash and burn could scorch its relationship with the Greens. That's after more than $200 million of climate spending is axed without a heads up to Minister James Shaw. What formula will Auckland Council use to value flood damaged houses for the buyout scheme? Its Finance Committee Chair Maurice Williamson is live. The slippery slope between giving your mountain mates a few ski tips and potentially being banned for professional coaching. And it's got the bones of a Banksy-style art mystery. A massive skull appears out of nowhere, chiselled into cliffs at a South Taranaki beach. Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website and also Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia taua tēnei. National is lining up to deliver its tax plan tomorrow, promising it will help what it calls the squeezed middle. The centrepiece will be tax cuts delivered through changes to income tax thresholds. But the devil will be in the detail, including how they'll be funded. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Raising the thresholds allows people to earn a bit more without going into a higher tax bracket. At last count, the estimated annual cost was about $2 billion. Labour's long challenged the opposition party to say how they will pay for it without extra borrowing, imposing other taxes or cutting public services. National says it's a plan that won't make inflation worse, won't increase debt and that can be managed whatever the state of the books. It says it would involve 4 new ways of raising revenue and reprioritising some government spending.
National MP Tim van der Molen has been formally censured by Parliament after the Privileges Committee found him in contempt. An independent review commission found he acted in a threatening manner towards Labour MP Shannon Halbert and impeded him from carrying out his duties as Select Committee Chair. Privileges Committee Chair David Parker says Parliament is a place for robust debate, but Mr van der Molen's conduct went too far.
While threatening behaviour is always a serious matter, it is particularly offensive for a member to be subject to such behaviour because of how they discharge their official parliamentary duties.
National leader Christopher Luxon says Tim van der Molen will not be a minister if National wins the election. And MPs have voted to suspend Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawiri Waititi from the House for 24 hours. Referring to a comment Mr Waititi made last week about an ongoing court case, Speaker of the House Adrian Rurauwhe said his conduct damages Parliament's relationship with the courts. The Speaker did not refer Rawiri Waititi to the Privileges Committee, but did name him in the House, a serious form of punishment.
Mr Waititi's conduct was grossly disorderly. Therefore, I name Rawiri Waititi and call on the House to judge his conduct.
Rawiri Waititi was not present today as he was at Fashion Week in Auckland. An advocate for migrants fears that the situation with workers living in overcrowded accommodation could be more widespread. Several agencies have been inspecting 6 Auckland properties over possible immigration fraud involving more than 100 Indian and Bangladeshi migrants. Advocate Sher Singh believes more cases will surface.
I could easily say there are hundreds of houses. Just a matter of time how soon these migrants will speak up. There's many ethnicities involved in this.
Mr Singh says one worker shared a house with 20 others. A Waikato Regional Councillor is surprised the Te Huia train was singled out by Waka Kotahi when 8 other passenger trains have also run red signals in the first half of this year. The Transport Agency sanctioned the Hamilton to Auckland service in July for twice running a red signal. Councillor Angela Strange says Te Huia might have been unfairly targeted.
Knowing now that there were other passenger trains, like you say, that were treated differently. We've got a few questions.
Angela Strange says since returning to its full route, Te Huia has had record passenger numbers. An Australian neurosurgeon who pulled a live 8-centimetre long worm from a patient's brain says the world's first discovery was a shock. Dr. Priya Bandi says the woman suffered months of diarrhoea, stomach pain, forgetfulness and depression.
And when you now retrospectively look at the CT initially done and then 2 weeks later MRI and then a few weeks later MRI, you can see that silhouette of this thing moving in time.
It's likely the worm grew from a larvae. In sport, Novak Djokovic has marked his return to the US Tennis Open with a straight sets win over Frenchman Alexandre Muller in the first round at Flushing Meadows. Djokovic was prevented from playing in last year's US Open due to being unvaccinated against COVID-19. The Serb says he could have served better in the second and third sets.
Dropped the level of my serve and, had to work for my points a bit more. But, nevertheless, I think I played great from the beginning to the end. Some hiccups, but I like the level. Hopefully I can maintain it in the next round as well.
By reaching the second round, Djokovic returns to world number 1, bumping Spain's Carlos Alcaraz from the top spot. All Blacks lock Scott Barrett is free to play in the opening Rugby World Cup game against host France on September 9th. An independent judiciary decided that no further sanction was necessary following his sending off for a second yellow card during the All Blacks' loss to South Africa at Twickenham. Meanwhile, the All Blacks have dropped 2 places to 4th in the world rankings following their record defeat to the Springboks. Simone Biles broke a 90-year record by winning her 8th all-round title at the US Gymnastics Championships. Her win comes less than a month after the 4-time Olympic champion returned to competition following a 2-year break to work on her mental health. That's the news.
Labor tightens the belt on public sector spending.
We're not cutting any spending on frontline public services. This is very much about effectively the back office of the public service.
Auckland nurses plead for extra security.
Crammed with up to 8 or 10 patients inches away from each other, tensions rise.
And locals rejoice as Kaitaia Airport stays open for another 35 years.
I'm absolutely ecstatic. Means that Kaitaia can now look forward to a really positive future.
Fasten your seatbelts. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Mainly fine today, but isolated light showers in Northland. Showers spreading south tomorrow morning. Some heavy and possibly thundery, mainly near eastern coasts. Waikato and Bay of Plenty mainly fine with overnight frosts. Scattered showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country and Gisborne to Wairarapa. Also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine weather with overnight frosts in many places and patches of early fog tomorrow. Areas of cloud from Horowhenua to Wellington tomorrow, spreading to Marlborough and Nelson in the evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland also. Stewart Island mainly fine, but showers about Fiordland and Stewart Island. Isolated showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow. And for Otago, Southland, isolated showers clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow with early frosts. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the occasional shower. Our next news is at 5:20 in headlines.
Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Finance Minister has apologised to the Climate Change Minister for failing to flag he was slashing millions of dollars for climate policies. The Labour government yesterday revealed nearly $4 billion in savings across the public service over the next 4 years. It comes on the eve of National's long-awaited tax plan, which will be funded through 4 new taxes. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins reigniting his policy bonfire in the face of declining tax revenue.
This will trim a further $4 billion from government spending and have the books back into surplus as soon as possible.
Included in that $4 billion is more than $200 million for climate policies. But the Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, wasn't given a heads up. He learned of the cut in climate spending at the same time as the public.
I would have expected to know if there were going to be changes made that might make it harder for us to hit our emissions targets without necessarily knowing the budget numbers themselves, because those are a Cabinet decision and of course I'm not in Cabinet.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson admits there was a communication breakdown.
I'll have a chat with James and apologise to him for that. He definitely should have known about it.
But that's at odds with Chris Hipkins, who says there was no need for James Shaw to be informed.
Well, these were savings that were identified by the ministers concerned, and so, I wouldn't have expected necessarily, if they weren't in his portfolio area, I wouldn't necessarily expect that they would be.
Regardless, Grant Robertson apologised to James Shaw by lunchtime.
I'll have a chat with James and apologise to him for that. He definitely should have known about it.
The Labour government's $4 billion slash in spending comes just days before National releases its long-awaited tax plan. The party has long talked about delivering tax cuts by raising the income tax thresholds, meaning people can earn a bit more without going into a higher tax bracket. Its finance spokesperson Nicola Willis insists the government's spending cuts haven't changed National's plan.
We can fully deliver it, regardless of the state that Labour leaves the books in.
National will reveal the scale and cost of its promised tax cuts tomorrow, and crucially, how it will pay for them. Earlier this year, the annual price tag had grown to about $2 billion. There was short-lived speculation National would tax churches and charities to cover the cost.
We're not playing rule in, rule out, we'll just wait till the tax plan gets announced tomorrow.
Behind the scenes, the party was hosing down that theory. National's tax cuts will not be funded through taxing churches and charities. They will, however, be partly paid for by more spending cuts. Nicola Willis is signalling how the rest of the cost will be covered.
There will be 4 additional revenue measures in our tax plan. They will be specific. They will be targeted.
Chris Hipkins expressing some early criticism of National's plan.
The National Party have been saying for the last 2 years that tax cuts should have been delivered and are affordable. They've effectively now admitted that they're not affordable, and they're going to introduce 4 new taxes in order to fund tax cuts or tax breaks for millionaires and for property owners.
The Labour government proposed a new tax of its own today, introducing legislation that won't pass before the election, which would enable a digital services tax on large multinational companies. The 3% tax would be paid by multinational businesses that make over $3.5 million a year through digital services provided to New Zealand users. Labour rejects that it rushed out the bill to gazump National's announcement tomorrow.
And that was Katie Scotcher reporting. Gareth Hughes is a political commentator and a former Green Party MP, and he's with us now. Kia ora, Gareth.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Is that bad manners, not having a chat to the Climate Change Minister?
Oh, it's definitely a poor process. Looks sort of more like an accident and a communication breakdown than any sort of deliberate poking in the eye of the Greens. But the fact is, you probably would want your Climate Change Minister in the room if you were making a decision to scrap climate change policies.
Doesn't it raise questions about who actually made the decisions then? Because Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister, said yesterday ministers were asked to look into their portfolios. Clearly that minister didn't.
Yeah, well, clearly the Climate Minister wasn't raised or made aware of these issues. He clearly wasn't in the room to making the decision. And look, I think it highlights the limits that the Greens have had this term to deliver policies outside of what their Labour coalition partners want to deliver, I think in the future, clearly, emissions revenue raised should be ring-fenced, and that has historically been the process. So once again, climate policies have been seen as the nice to have, and they've been rated for the spending cuts.
Yeah, I want to talk about the finance a little bit later, but what do you think it says about the value Labour puts on the relationship? Because the Prime Minister, Labour leader, has said, I didn't need to have a chat with him.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that Robertson and the Prime Minister weren't on the same page communicating a similar message. The Prime Minister might be right, technically, around the delegations of ministers and who's in the room and who's informed with information flows. But I think Robertson has made the right call here, being very pragmatic. He's kept his eye on the ball. We're 6 weeks before the election. You wouldn't want to antagonise your key coalition partner on their key issue, which is climate change, just before the election. So Robertson has done the right thing. He's apologised. These things happen in politics, particularly if it's been a rush process, and it does look like this has been quite a rush process to find these $4 billion in savings.
Consultation aside, how significant are the projects? I mean, do they deserve to be canned?
Probably not. We're in a situation described as global boiling by the United Nations. We've been shocked by climate extreme weather events around the world, not least in New Zealand earlier this year. So scrapping funding from walking and cycling, forestry, including natives, agricultural emission reduction projects aren't ideal. Remember, this is on top of earlier climate policies being thrown on the policy bonfire as well. So given the state of the world and the environment, it's not ideal that climate policies are often the first ones to be cut or raided when savings need to be made. Look, I just hope one day we'll take the climate budget as seriously as we take the national budget.
Might we be too late for that?
Well, it's going to make it hard because the government has committed to emission reductions. They've got international obligations, and there has been no impact assessment of what these reductions are going to cost or how the government's going to fill the hole in the climate budget.
So you mentioned before about the Climate Emergency Response Fund, in essence. So a big chunk of the money allocated to these projects is from that fund, which is supposed to be ring-fenced, right? Only supposed to be spent on money that is around these projects. But the Finance Minister has been very clear. This is just a savings now. That money won't go back into the pool.
Yes, I think it is very concerning and disturbing because this money has been raised through the emissions trading scheme, and it should be going to help Kiwis and New Zealand companies to reduce their emissions. Ultimately, the Crown has a massive financial obligation. Treasury pointed to between $3 and $20 billion if we have to purchase the bulk of carbon credits offshore. So this comes at a long-term, very real cost for this short-term savings. And ultimately, in a cost-of-living crisis, all politicians from all parties should be trying to look for solutions that are win-win, that tackle both, that help Kiwis reduce, the cost they're paying at the pump or whatever it might be through climate solutions, and policies which actually help tackle reducing emissions. Other countries, such as the US with the Climate Inflation Reduction Act, is trying to do both at the same time. So I think that's the challenge for politicians, not try to see it as a conflict or as a cost.
Good to talk to you, Gareth. We appreciate your time. That is Gareth Hughes, political commentator and, of course, a former Green Party MP. It is 5:15. Ki amo tūne mai. Do stay with us. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Didn't have a conversation with James Shaw, Minister James Shaw, about that before making their cut announcements and a lot of green policies there. You are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The text is 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Rotorua's mayor says the city is in desperate need of extra police and has renewed her call for reinforcements after a young girl was attacked outside the library. It is the second time it's happened in the last week to two different girls. But other community leaders say an increase in police will only create more tension. John Dunn has more from Rotorua.
Outside the Rotorua Library, waiting for the bus, locals are beginning to feel concerned for their safety.
You're sort of almost looking over your shoulder. You're checking the environment out, that's for sure.
It's aggravating to know that this is what's happening to our children. I'm a young mum myself, and I'm now scared to actually let my children catch the bus themselves.
It's not good that you can't be in public by yourself without worrying about someone attacking you.
Well, I think it's just getting worse and worse. You just read the paper and it's all doom and gloom, isn't it? There's just such a lot of crime. And the young ones just getting away with it, really, aren't they?
This is where 2 teenage girls were attacked in the last week. Rotorua Mayor Tanya Tapsell is calling for an immediate increase in police presence. These locals agree.
But I would like to see a high security presence. I think that would be a good preventative measure first, at least.
Definitely more police, yes. And to see them walking about on the beat, you know, like they used to be. You don't see them about so much now, do you?
You know, if they're seen, then it's obviously a deterrent, but I mean, they've got the cameras there, they don't seem to make any difference.
But Daniel Edwards, a hapu member of Tura Te Ngako, a trust supporting local hapu and iwi, says that would only inflame things.
I don't think that's the solution at all. I think it would cause more damage. Having a police presence just encourages conflict because community or even youngsters out there don't have a good relationship with the police.
Having her own daughter at high school, Edwards hears about how awful these bus stops can be.
The kids and their bullying tactics, how they group together and they just attack anybody that's there that they feel that they can get on top of.
She says better school transport and more Māori wardens could help keep younger people safe. However, a source involved in the community, who prefers to be anonymous, says Māori wardens have been largely absent in the city for years. Their office was also empty when visited today. Police Minister Ginny Anderson says arrangements are already being made to boost the police presence.
It's always a concern when we see these incidents happen, such as in Rotorua. I've just spoken with Tanya Tapsell only about half an hour ago and spoken in terms of what the local plan is to get back on top of safety in the community. She's also meeting with the area commander tomorrow, so they'll be discussing what additional support police can provide.
However, the National Party's spokesperson for police, Mark Mitchell, says little will be achieved.
They've failed, so I don't know what Ginny Henson's going to do. She stood in the House 16 times in the last few months since she's been Minister, saying that people should feel safer. So I don't expect any response from Ginny Henson at all, or to understand or to know what to do with the situation in Rotorua. It's obvious that this government is completely out of ideas. They've got no idea what to do.
Rotorua Mayor Tanya Tapsell says the city is already behind in police numbers, considering it has one of the highest crime rates in the country.
John Dunn reporting there, and if you live in Rotorua, let us know your thoughts. Do you need more police on the ground? 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. 5:20. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme, whether it's about police numbers in Rotorua or also budget cuts, some coming out of green initiatives and the failure to inform James Shaw, Minister James Shaw, of the cuts in his portfolio. Would love to hear your thoughts. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time to go to the headlines now. Anea Susana, mena pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Finance Minister Grant Robertson has said sorry to Climate Change Minister James Shaw for not warning him ahead of a $236 million in climate spending cuts. The government's making $4 billion in public service savings amid a turbulent global economy and a tax take that's $2 billion less than expected. Former Green MP Gareth Hughes told Checkpoint money for green policies should be ring-fenced, but Mr Robertson had done the right thing by apologising. Meanwhile, on Thursday, the government will introduce plans for a digital services tax on multinational companies such as Apple and Amazon from 2025. More than 140 countries were supposed to start implementing next year, a deal overhauling decades-old taxation rules, but that's been pushed back. National leader Christopher Luxon says MP Tim van der Molen will not be a minister if the party wins the election. Parliament today formally censured Mr van der Molen after an independent review found he acted in a threatening manner towards Labour's Shannon Halbert. Te Pāti Māori co-leader Rawari Waititi has been suspended from the House for 24 hours for commenting on an ongoing court case. Speaker Adrian Rurafe said Mr Waititi had damaged Parliament's relationship relationship with the courts. And global gas prices are expected to rise if workers at 2 liquefied natural gas plants in Australia go on strike over pay and conditions. The Chevron sites produce more than 5% of the world's liquefied natural gas. Those are the headlines. Our next headlines will be at 20 to 6. Thanks, Lisa.
Ngā mihi, Susana. All Blacks lock Scott Barrett has been cleared to play in the opening game of the Rugby World Cup after receiving a red card in the warm-up test against the Springboks on Sunday. Barrett was sent off in the record defeat after being shown a second yellow card. And with me now is sports reporter Jonty Dine. So a complete mozzer on a number of levels, Jonty. But so Barrett gets off scot-free for this, does he?
Scot-free, yes. I like the pun, Lisa. Yes. Barrett will not see a suspension after his red card at the weekend. The official reasoning the committee gave was because he was given 2 yellow cards, and the first, of course, was for a technical offence. Now, as many know, Barrett's a bit of a recidivist offender when it comes to red cards. This is the 3rd of his career, and he's the only All Black in history to be sent off twice. The first, of course, coming in 2019 against the Wallabies. That was another ugly clean out, that time Wallabies skipper Michael Hooper. He also saw red during the Super Rugby season. That was for a shoulder charge to the head of a Blues player. So due to his record, it is a bit surprising that he was let off the hook. It was, a pretty reckless, ugly shot. And to be honest, just pretty dumb, Lisa. I mean, Barrett's such a crucial cog in the All Blacks pack, and this is one area of his game that he really needs to clean up because he is so valuable to the side. But the news, of course, will come as a great relief for Foster, who was already sweating on injuries to the likes of Brodie Retallick, Shannon Frizzell and Tyrell Lomax. But this decision will, of course, have pundits again questioning the consistency of the judiciary. Of course, England captain Owen Farrell has been under the spotlight of late for his high shot against Wales, and former All Black George Moala, he's also set to miss 3 pool games for Tonga while he serves a match ban for a tip tackle. So plenty of questions, Lisa, surrounding how dangerous play is going to affect this year's Rugby World Cup.
OK, tennis. Novak Djokovic is back at the US Open.
He is, yes. So the superstar, he famously missed the US Open last year because of his vaccination status. That COVID-19 vaccine mandate has been dropped, so he's back on court, and he was in pretty imperious form this afternoon. He eased past world number 84 Alexandre Muller for France, 6-love, 6-2, 6-3, and he reclaimed his world number 1 ranking from Carlos Alcaraz in the process. Now, many will be hoping those two meet again after they played out an epic at the Cincinnati Open at the weekend. Now, in his post-match speech, it was pretty clear that the fans at Flushing Meadows, they were pretty happy to have him back.
I might have a late start, but nevertheless, I was excited to go out on the court. It has been a couple of years, and to come in front of you guys is always a pleasure and an honor to play here in Rotorua. So thanks for coming out. Thanks also for all the people who stayed, almost 1 a.m. I appreciate your presence also this late.
So still a fan favourite, as you can hear from that reception, Lisa. Now, Djokovic, of course, he is going to be looking to win his 4th US Open and his 24th Grand Slam overall, so adding to a pretty impressive resume.
Yeah, big trophy cabinet. Thank you, Jonty. That is Jonty Dine with Sport. Muriwai homeowners still have no idea how the value of their flood-damaged properties will be calculated for the Joint Government Council buyout scheme. 24 Muriwai properties were yesterday deemed too dangerous to live in, and they'll likely be bought out by the council in government. The owners of those Category 3 properties are now waiting to hear how much they'll be offered for their wrecked homes. Auckland Councillor Maurice Williamson chairs the Revenue, Expenditure and Finance Committee that is overseeing the buyout process, and he joins me now. Kia ora, Maurice.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
How complicated is it to establish value on these properties?
Look, it's a very complicated process to get to the end product because, first of all, we had to work out the sort of global numbers, what percentage of government, what percentage of council. By getting some really good movement by the government on some making space for water issues and transport network recovery, we've finalised on the house buyback at a 50-50 deal, which is great, which means council gets some real benefit in the other areas, and we go 50-50 with government on the house buyback. But the real difficult issue then is you've first of all got to have a lot of detail go into how you categorise each house, and that's got a lot of work to be done. It's not just the house that's damaged, but a house that could be potentially at risk from a cliff or in a floodplain that is likely to flood again with even just modest water. It's very hard for the residents. Lisa, I get that. It must be heartbreaking for some of them, but it's one of these issues that's going to take some time to get to the end of the line.
Maurice, are you going to use the same formula for every property that's classified as 3 and eligible for a buyout?
My understanding of it is, and none of this is decided yet, remember, we first of all got to actually go out and consult with the public on whether the public are happy with the council spending our money on this buyback. But I believe we'll get to a reasonable place on that. The details are yet to be ironed out. I would have thought that the formula will be reasonably, it has to be reasonably transparent to all people so they can see why it was that Fred up the road got what he got and Mary down the road got what she got. It's going to be a difficult process, but I think if there's some goodwill on all sides, the council's definitely prepared to put the money into its 50% of the buyback. I think we'll get there in the end.
Aren't there some lessons from the Christchurch earthquake, Maurice? Could you not just apply the most recent rates valuation to properties?
Yeah, look, there are some lessons from the Christchurch earthquake. I was the Associate Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Minister for many years, and I do think some of that we can take on board. But there are some unique situations, just as there was in Christchurch. Some of the properties are not that badly damaged, but of course they are in big risk category of a cliff behind them, or they're on top of a cliff that could eventually go, or in a plain where the flooding could be really bad even from modest rainfall.
If they're unlivable, Maurice, just on that point, if I can get you to pause for a second, if they are unlivable because of the risk, they are of no value to the person who owns them, right? So then to establish what their prior value was, do you think rateable value is a good option?
I'm not going to comment on that because that's something yet to be decided by the full council. That will be an issue. It certainly will be one of the issues for consideration.
Right, so one of the potential formulas in the mix. What other options would there be for determining value?
Well, trying to make a general estimate of what property values were in the area using some sort of a multiplier, but again, that will be different for each of the properties, so it's going to be difficult. In the end, it's a voluntary scheme and the property owner will have a right to say, I'm not prepared to settle at that level. But then you've got quite difficult issues of what you do for the future for that. Look, all I want to make it clear is this is a very difficult process with a long way to go yet and a lot of decisions yet to be taken on the specifics. And anybody who thinks that it's simple is really dreaming.
So I suppose what you want to achieve is a good starting point. So do you want these people who are unable to live in their houses and can't because they're too dangerous, do you think as a result of the buyout they should be able to buy like for like somewhere else? Is that what you're trying to achieve? Sorry, Maurice, your line has just gone a bit. Your line just went a bit funny there, and we couldn't hear you. So, if you wouldn't mind repeating.
But are you okay again now?
Slightly. I might get you to shuffle around a little bit because this is kind of critical.
Okay.
Should people out of a buyout settlement be able to buy like for the property that they had for the next property they own?
Of course, that would be the general principle you would use when you were trying to do the settlement, that like for like. But again, one of the problems with that is very difficult to exactly pinpoint what like for like is. The same sort of a house but in a different suburb may to somebody say that's not worth what it was when it was back where I was. So look, we're going to work this through. We're going to try in good faith keep everybody informed. Council's got some decisions to make and it'll go to the whole governing body in the end, the package, and then the various individual settlements will be done. But I would suggest that this could easily be still running at the end of the year.
Sorry, say that again. Do you anticipate that they will be given a number by the end of the year?
I would hope that many of them get a number before that time, but I said I would suggest this could still be running by the end of this year and go into the new year.
But you are hopeful or aiming to give them a number by the end of the year?
No one can tell. That's my problem. Here's the problem, Lisa. No one can tell. No one can tell. This is all new uncharted territory. You can't. If I made a commitment to you right now, look, I guarantee this will be done by the 28th of October, done, I'd be foolish because there are so many moving parts. and so many people needing to be involved in it and so many people needing to be making that final decision.
Doesn't get any cheaper the longer you leave it, though, does it, Maurice?
Well, that's not true if property prices are dropping.
Well, that would suggest that you're looking to give them a value other than the one that they had prior to the damage.
No, it's not. You said like for like. If a property to what they had before will have dropped in value as well by now.
Right, so potentially some people get paid out less than what their last rateable value was.
Well, you said like for like. If we were offering them a property of a similar type nature to what their property was, the property prices dropping may affect that. I'm not saying they will.
Right.
Again, I don't want any of this interview to be it's a definite, because nothing's definite yet.
OK, Maurice, one thing that will be definite is who comes up with the formula to put before the council for a vote, for a full vote. Is that your committee?
We will have officials. We've got a flood recovery manager who's been brought in specifically for the purpose with a staff. They're going out and visiting on a daily basis, talking to residents. See, some of the categorisation is not yet finalised. Many of the properties out in West Auckland are categorised as 2/3, which means they might be a 2 or they might be a 3. So that's got to be done yet as well. It's not like they're all being categorised and that's done and finished.
Thank you for your time, Maurice. Appreciate it. Maurice Williamson, who chairs the Revenue, Expenditure and Finance Committee. They are overseeing the buyout process. As he says, any decisions will be taken by the full council. It is 27 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa anai ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. OK, Tourism Holdings, the camper van people, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so they're making the most of a rebound in tourism. What have they made?
They made almost $50 million as a full-year profit, and that compares with a loss of $2.1 million the year earlier. So that's a big reversal there of their fortunes. And their fleet numbers are almost double as well what they were. They were, 4,000 last year. This year, 7,200.
Because didn't they offload a bunch of camper vans during the COVID crisis?
Yes. It was a terribly difficult time for them, and they laid off staff and so on. But the people that they were able to keep, they're giving them a bonus of $1,000 of shares. So that's a big deal. And they're going to give their shareholders a dividend. So things seem to be picking up for Tourism Holdings. They say that the merger they did with Apollo, which is an Australian firm last year, has really helped them out. And yeah, the outlook is pretty bright. The market loved that result, and the share price rose about 12% by the end of the day.
Okay, what's the haps with Fisher & Paykel?
Different story. So Tourism Holdings benefiting from the post-COVID world. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, not so much.
Yeah, especially when you make equipment that's useful during COVID.
Exactly. So their revenue for the 6 months ending in September is expected to be about $790 million. That's still pretty good. And that's a 14% increase from the year before. However, their outlook for their profit is hardly as stellar. So they were forecasting a net profit, or rather, was it an underlying profit? Yeah, in the range of 95 to 105 million. But the consensus was for a profit of 125 million. So that disappointed the market initially, but luckily for Fisher & Paykel, I guess, the Chinese market really picked up today. And so overall, their share price rose 0.25%, which they had been down earlier in the day, and had in fact dragged the market down. So now we're looking at an index which finished up 0.4%. That was a 49-point gain to 11,528, which is an improvement of where we've seen in recent times. The New Zealand dollar...
I'm trying not to look at your paper, Nona. I'm trying to wait for the big reveal. Okay.
Okay, the New Zealand dollar, it's steady. Okay, that's good, right? 59.2 US cents. That's even a little bit better than where it was yesterday, I think. 91.9 Australian and 46.9 British pence. And that's really with news that China is looking to support their markets, and that's given the market a boost. There you go.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. A skier sharing tips with his friends on the slopes says staff at Wanaka's Treble Cone threatened to cancel his pass for unauthorised coaching if he didn't stop immediately. James Sorensen was on the mountain when he says ski field staff approached him, implied he was a professional instructor and asked him to stop teaching his friends. Only Treble Cone authorised instructors can give lessons with one-on-one sessions starting at $240 for an hour and a half and up to $799 for a full day. A full day of group lessons is $150. But the ski field operator says recently there's been a spike in people offering unofficial lessons via social media, and that's also a health and safety issue. Now, James explains what happened when he was on the slopes last weekend.
It was a group of 4 of us, and one of the guys, he was just off on his own on the learner's slope, just going up and down. And I was with 2 guys, one it was the second day, and the other was his first time. I was just kind of, reiterating how to stop, making sure they're doing sort of a nice wedge, a pizza with their skis. And then, the ski instructor approached me. It was just a really strange experience. He kind of, I would say aggressive, but very, very serious.
And what did he say to you, James?
So when he first came up to me, he was saying that he felt like maybe that it couldn't be possibly that we're friends. It just seemed like it was too professional. The point is, it was too organised, I guess. I tried to explain to him that I was a builder. I thought it was quite funny at that moment. Well, this can't be possibly right. Yeah, I've been there for a few years now skiing, and then so he then said that there must have been money exchanged. He felt, and I said no, definitely there hasn't. And he said that I can't possibly prove that that's the case. We took a photo of my pass and said if I come up with anybody else that they'll, what was his wording, explore options with my pass.
Okay, lot in that, James. So let's backtrack a little bit. To be clear, you are a builder and you have never been paid to teach people or instruct people to ski.
No, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. Now, the person queried that this looked like a commercial arrangement to them. Were you there with your buddies? What was the situation? Who was with you? Your friends?
Yeah, they were my friends. Yeah, I had a few extra pairs of skis and lent them to them and a couple of gloves and whatnot. Yeah, took them up. Yep. Yeah, we all travelled together, yeah.
And so teaching them how to put the brakes on in terms of skiing was considered by this staffer to be too professional in terms of your instruction?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. I don't really understand. I mean, we were kind of sticking to our own. I didn't have my skis on. Maybe that was something else. I was just, because I knew that if I put my skis on, I wouldn't be able to stop a guy if he was flying towards a child or something. So, that could have had something to do with it. I'm not sure.
So what did you make of all of that, James?
Oh, it's just, it's pretty disappointing. I love the mountains down here. I mean, I've been skiing at these two for a few years now. I lived locally and, I've always sung the praises of these mountains, and then having this happen, it's pretty disappointing.
Are you clear where the line is, James? I mean, what if you had a child and you took them up there and you were telling them how to ski down the slopes? Or what if you took your partner or your spouse up and were explaining, hey, don't do it that way, do it this way? Are you clear where the line is? What makes you an instructor?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not clear at all. I said this to the guy. I said to him, I've been taught by my friends and my family over the years, and now, I've taught my partner, I've taught some of my friends, and I said to him, what happens when I have kids and I want to teach them? And he responded by saying, don't get defensive. So I guess, it sounds like it's okay, but yeah.
Their position is obviously they offer professional lessons, right, and paid time with instructors. And they say that recently there's been a spike in people via Facebook groups and the like offering unofficial lessons, I suppose undercutting their instructors. So that's partly what they're saying. Can you see why they might have an issue with that?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I've paid for lessons in the past. But from my point of view, if somebody is a beginner and they have friends who want to teach them, like I cannot see how that's bad for them. I would never have got lessons myself if I'd been put off at the start. If I'd been told, no, well, if my father had been told, per se, that no, you're not allowed to teach your son, then there was no chance. I wouldn't be skiing now.
Hey, one thing, James. Were you flattered that they thought that you could be an actual commercial instructor?
At first, yeah. It definitely felt like a compliment to begin with. Yeah, no, for sure.
And that was skier James Sorensen then. Treble Cohen says the conversation with James was civil and so far it hasn't had to ban anyone for unauthorised teaching. And to be clear, the teaching they're talking about is a commercial arrangement. It is 13 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, do send us your feedback. You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. If you want to join the conversation, and the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Just very quickly, we're going to do some feedback on crime in Rotorua and whether they need more police. This person says, I'm a Rotorua local. I think that a larger police presence is only one part of the puzzle. It's the lack of empathy displayed by the teens fighting and bullying others, and bullies are spurred on by peers who are filming the whole thing for TikTok or Snapchat, then adults not intervening. It's always been pretty staunch with fights on the field when I was at school 30 years ago. But if a teacher came, the fight was broken up, no one was filming. It is disturbing and not unique. This one from Kyle says, too many police in their cars chasing people doing 1 or 2 Ks too many. Get out of your car, walk the street so you can be seen and prevent those youths, etc., lurking around looking for trouble. Then the crime rates will drop. Do keep feedback coming. Time to get to the headlines now. Anea Susana, mena piti kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. National says its tax plan to be unveiled tomorrow will help the squeezed middle. It's promising changes to income tax levels and says its proposals won't make inflation worse, won't increase debt and could be managed whatever the state of the books. MPs are debating the Supreme Court's landmark declaration that the voting age is inconsistent with the Bill of Rights. The country's highest court last year ruled that current voting laws discriminate on the basis of age. Legislation to lower the voting age to 16 in local body elections will be read for the first time this evening, although the Prime Minister has ruled out lowering it for the general elections. Rotorua Mayor Tania Tapsil says crime is costing the council $2 million a year on private security guards. There have been 2 assaults on young girls within the last week. The Mayor wants urgent police reinforcements, but a trust supporting local iwi fears that will put some people on edge. An Otago Community Board chair has been encouraged to resign after using a racist slur against a member of the public. An independent investigation was carried out against Strath Taire Community Board Chair Barry Williams, and it found he had breached the Code of Conduct. The Dunedin City Council considered the subsequent report today, and Mayor Jules Radich has issued a letter of censure. And Ziggy Marley, son of reggae legends Bob and Rita Marley, has been named as the first headline artist for the 2024 WOMAD Festival, which takes place in New Plymouth in March. That's the news. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Susana. There could be a decision on whether or not a proposed airport in central Otago goes ahead within the next year. Christchurch Airport today unveiled details, including its preferred runway alignment for the controversial international airport in Terrace. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown is in Terrace and filed this report.
Christchurch Airport is now sitting on almost 800 hectares of land in the tiny settlement of Terrace, home to only a few hundred people. But if its plan to build a wide-body, jet-capable international airport goes ahead, it's predicting in just a couple of decades, almost 4 million passengers could be flying in and out of the area every year. The airport's Chief Strategy and Stakeholder Officer, Michael Singleton, says so far the plan is stacking up.
There's probably nothing that we've seen to date that suggests that it's beyond the realms of possibility. Yeah, but we do still have an open mind that this may not get there.
Mr Singleton says it's hoped a call can be made on proceeding to consent within 12 months, but he concedes even then it won't simply happen overnight.
Look, you have to be realistic and say there's going to be a level of opposition that's going to travel with this all the way through its process, and that's been the case since day one, and that's the case I think with every large piece of infrastructure that New Zealand's tried to build.
Project Director Rhys Boswell says whether the Central Otago Airport proceeds or not, the demand for visiting the area will continue to climb. The airport estimates that Queenstown Airport's capacity will be reached as soon as 2025, and by 2050 as many as an additional 3.7 million passenger movements will be needed. Rhys Boswell says not doing anything will cost residents and visitors.
The one that I think will be felt first, in my personal view, will be that the increased demand for seats will cause prices for tickets in and out of this region to increase significantly.
Rhys Boswell says there will also be issues for those simply trying to find a seat, with an estimated 2 or 3 people vying for every place by 2050. He says there'll also be implications for importers and exporters, but there'll also be congestion issues on the road, with Christchurch Airport estimating about 2.5 million passenger movements destined for Central Otago will have to come via Invercargill, Dunedin or Christchurch by 2050, and those living within the area will have to travel longer distances to catch a flight. Mr Boswell says he thinks they've found the right site to accommodate that growth.
It's in a location that is remote from the major population centres of the region, but it is also reasonably centrally located and within relatively short driving distance from those population centres. So there is a bit of a Goldilocks zone.
The area already has those who call it home, and Sustainable Terrace Chair Marilyn Duxon isn't keen to have an airport as her neighbour.
No surprises, it's still all about mass tourism. They're talking about 3.7 million visitors per annum, almost doubling tourism to New Zealand, and wide-body jets, 24/7 operation. This is not a clean, quiet little operation that's going to hit our valley.
Marilyn Duxon isn't alone in her opposition, but it's fair to say views are mixed in the area. How strong the divide is may become clearer as the proposal reaches the planning stage.
And speaking of airports, thousands of people across Britain and around the world have had their travel plans thrown into chaos because of a glitch in the air traffic control system. Now, that includes many New Zealanders trying to get in and out of the UK. Phil Vine from World Watch reports.
The timing couldn't have been much worse. It's one of the busiest days of the year for UK airports.
Due to fly at 11 a.m. this morning. It's now 4 p.m. We've just been told that our flight's been cancelled.
Thousands of people returning from their summer holes.
There's been flights before us with other airlines that have been cancelled. We're really keeping our fingers crossed that we can actually get home tonight.
The problem lies with air traffic control. Katie Austin, BBC aviation correspondent, explains.
Control services provider NATS said a technical issue meant it was having to input flight plans manually. That takes longer, so it had to restrict how many flights could operate. The result, hundreds of delays and cancellations into and out of the UK.
Travel plans upset, holidaymakers crammed in airports, cranky, sleep deprived.
It's 2:10 in the morning, so sorry if my voice is a little croaky.
25-year-old Aucklander Isabella Lenders is trying to get to Amsterdam on the way home to New Zealand. She's been touring Europe with 26-year-old Ben Wallace.
Me and my partner have been travelling for about 2.5 months now. We're doing our OE.
Rocking up to the airport in Glasgow for the short hop to the Netherlands, unaware of the aviation chaos that was brewing.
All the flights started getting cancelled and delayed, so our flight was cancelled completely. I think we got the notification at around 2 p.m, so 15 minutes before our flight was to take off.
All the staff from their airline EasyJet appeared to have vanished.
We couldn't call them. Their phones weren't going through properly. Like you would call and then it would hang up straight away. The airport staff are really lovely though. They gave us like an information brochure from EasyJet.
And no other flights for 48 hours.
Yeah, everybody was just a bit up in the air, not sure what to do. All of us were pretty much sitting on the ground because there wasn't any seats for us to sit in trying to figure out what to do.
Then Isabella came up with a workaround. They'd rail to Bristol via London on their rail pass and get a flight to Amsterdam. Sorted. They booked the flight, embarked on the 7-hour journey, but just before the train pulled into Bristol, bad news.
And within an hour left on our train, we found out that flight was also going to be cancelled for tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So we kind of have just given up a little bit for tonight.
This is UK consumer advocate Lisa Webb.
If you're stuck for a really long time, you should be getting food or drink. If you're stuck overnight, the airline should be paying for accommodation for you.
But not if you're an EasyJet passenger, it seems. Isabella says the email they got said it was an extraordinary event and not the airline's fault, so no expenses. They're trying to claim it on their travel insurance.
You know, it's pretty stressful not actually knowing what to do in these situations and not actually being able to speak to a real person from the airline that's cancelled your flights.
Isabella was born in Holland. She's hoping to catch up with Rellies, but it's really spoilt what was going to be a highlight of the trip.
We still are unsure on how we're supposed to get there. Our whole trip is going to be delayed by about at least 2 days, which means we may not be able to see some family.
Then it's Dubai and home.
We're really looking forward to being in our own beds and to have our own space and quiet. We've been in a lot of dorm rooms backpacking, so it's definitely going to be nice to get home back to New Zealand.
Fingers crossed they eventually make their connecting flight in Amsterdam.
It's 7 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Mystery surrounds the appearance of a stylised skull carved into the sandstone cliffs at Waipipi Beach near Waverley in South Taranaki. The creation is reminiscent of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards' famous skull rings, or for millennials, the equivalent emoji. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has been to Waipipi Beach.
The carving, which has materialised over the past few weeks, is chiselled onto a finger of headland at the bottom of the Waipipi boat ramp. Fresh cuttings lie at the base of the cliff. It's about 2 metres high by 2 metres wide, and the skull's hollowed out eye sockets stare out over an expanse of blank sand to the Tasman Sea beyond. Ralph Jellett lives in one of the 18 homes at the Waipipi Beach gated community. He was unaware of the skull until I pointed it out to him.
It looks okay from what I see of it, but I mean, it's strange to have it down on our beach, I have to say. It's not the sort of thing I would do. But some younger people obviously might have done it.
On social media, some people have described the carving as a desecration, and Ralph can see their point.
Fair enough too, if they are, you know, I mean, it's not natural to have it down there, so I think perhaps they've got something to do, something to moan about.
Ralph doesn't know who's behind the carving, but reckons anyone upset with it won't have to wait long before Mother Nature erases it from existence.
The sea will probably lop it off anyway. The sea comes in and hit that. It's quite soft, that stuff, and it'll go pretty soon, I would imagine.
So not a big deal?
I wouldn't think it's a big deal. I think it'll be gone pretty soon. A lot of the cliff has gone away over the years. So I would say the same will happen to that skull.
Bunty Karan loves the sculpture.
I mean, somebody's got to be passionate enough to spend all that time. It's not, time doesn't come for free. I mean, and it makes it look better than a graffiti on the wall. And those walls are going to wear off one of these days. I mean, it erodes away. What does it matter? I think it's awesome.
Bunty doesn't know who's behind the carving either.
We don't know. We keep it that way, I reckon. Maybe somebody out of the ocean. I don't know.
A local or visitor? What do you reckon?
I think maybe a local.
You know, but you don't want to say?
Nah. If they don't want to be known, then who the hell am I to tell? I mean, it's just art. I think it's just beautiful. Art is beautiful in any form.
Tiffany sees the skull every day when she walks down the beach.
Yeah, I think people like carving their names and drawing things in the cliffs, and
Yeah, they've been down there ever since I've been here. They evolve over time as well. They get washed away and dug out again.
She's also in the dark over who the artist is.
No, just visitors to the beach.
Bit
Yeah.
of a mystery, that one,
Yes,
isn't it?
bit of a mystery, just, yeah. There's lots of names down there as well, so everyone likes leaving their little piece of art behind.
Tiffany understands it might not be to everybody's taste.
I would see how that would offend some people. You can't stop people from putting a little bit of artwork down at the beach though, can you? And yeah, people visit down there all the time. I've never actually seen anyone doing the work down there, but there's names in the cliff and everything. It's you could call it graffiti, you could call it art. It is what it is.
The South Taranaki District Council says it's never come across something like the skull before. It says technically it triggers the need for a consent under the district plan. The council encourages other artists to come and have a chat before embarking on any large-scale ideas within the coastal protection area. The Taranaki Regional Council and Ngārauru have also been approached for comment.
And that was Robin Martin reporting. If you were listening on radio, we'll put that story on our webpage. Check out the pictures and let us know what you think. And staying with weird and wonderful, don't know if this is wonderful, surgeons at Canberra Hospital have made a shock discovery, finding an 8 centimetre live worm inside the brain of a female patient. Oh, it's the first time this sort of worm has been found inside a human being. The parasite normally lives in carpet pythons. The ABC's Elizabeth Cramsey reports.
For infectious diseases physician Sananjaya Senanyaka, it was a call he wasn't expecting.
I was on what we call ward service, looking after other patients in the hospital who had infection problems, and I got a call saying, we've got a patient with an infection problem. We've just removed a live worm from this patient's brain.
One of his colleagues at Canberra Hospital, neurosurgeon Dr Hari Bandi, had operated on a 64-year-old woman who had been admitted to her local hospital in January of 2021. She had abdominal pain, diarrhoea, night sweats and a cough. By 2022, those symptoms had developed to include forgetfulness and depression. An MRI was conducted and picked up an abnormality.
So when the surgeon went in, she was going to do a biopsy. Was it cancer? Was it an abscess, etc.? And suddenly, with her forceps, she's picking up this thing that's wriggling. And and she will tell you that she and everyone in that operating theatre were absolutely stunned.
Then came the mission to identify what the 8 centimetre long critter was.
So then, of course, there was a flurry of activity in our microbiology laboratory, just trying to work out what this worm was. And eventually, with the help of a very clever CSIRO scientist, we worked out that this was a new parasite that had never been seen in a human before.
So where does a creature like this normally live?
This worm or this parasite is recognised to be inside carpet pythons, which are found all around the east coast, that, as far as I understand. When the snake poos, it poos out the eggs of the parasite, and normally what happens in the animal world, small mammals or marsupials will eat grass, etc., and accidentally pick up those eggs of the parasite, and the parasite will develop in that mammal or marsupial. Then the snake will eat the mammal or marsupial, and the parasite will complete its life cycle. So we as humans are accidental hosts. It's not meant to get into us.
Oh dear. Eggy poop and, I don't know, makes me feel slightly nauseous. On Taras Airport, hey, now the government has canned climate change funding. Maybe a new airport at Taras will help, that listener says.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia Tawa tēnei. A Rotorua Trust supporting local iwi is concerned a heavier police presence in the city will put some people on edge. Mayor Tania Tapsil's calling for urgent police reinforcements as the council is spending $2 million a year on private sector security guards because of crime. There have been 2 assaults on young girls within the last week. Taniele Edwards, a Hapu member of Tura Tingako, says more police is not the answer.
I don't think that's the solution at all. I think it would cause more damage. Having a police presence just encourages conflict because community or even youngsters out there don't have a good relationship with the police.
The Police Minister, Ginny Anderson, says the Mayor of Rotorua is working with police to address the crime problem. A colleague of National MP Tim van der Molen says Parliament comes with the privilege of playing hard but fair, but the Waikato MP crossed the line. Mr van der Molen was formally censured this afternoon after Parliament's Privileges Committee found him in contempt. He was found to have threatened Labour MP Shannon Halbert and impeded his ability to perform his duties. National MP Chris Bishop, who sits on the Privileges Committee, says Parliament should be a place where all who work inside it feel safe.
The question before the committee was if this wasn't contempt of Parliament, then what is?
Chris Bishop says the recommendation to censure Tim van der Molen was bipartisan. It's emerged the Transport Agency was aware other passenger trains were running red lights, but only acted to sanction the Auckland to Hamilton service Te Huia. Waka Kotahi knew at the time of 8 other Metro passenger trains which ran red lights earlier in the year. Libby Kirkby-McLeod reports.
Waka Kotahi sanctioned the Te Huia service in July, saying it was concerned the train was a safety risk after 2 signal passed at danger events, or SPADs, had been reported. However, information provided by Waka Kotahi to RNZ shows that between the 1st of January and the beginning of July, 27 SPADs were reported across the network. 2 of these were Te Huia, 2 were other Auckland Metro trains, and 6 Wellington Metro trains. The other incidents involved freight trains and maintenance vehicles.
A group opposed to a proposed airport at Terrace says the idea is premised on mass tourism and will damage the environment. Christchurch Airport has today unveiled its plans for the small central Otago settlement, with a runway capable of handling flights to and from Australia, the South Pacific and Southeast Asia. Sustainable Terrace Chair Dr Marilyn Duxon says another international airport to accommodate millions of passengers makes no sense in a climate crisis.
It's still all about mass tourism. They're talking about 3.7 million visitors per annum and wide-bodied jets 24/7. This is not a clean, quiet little operation.
A Tertiary Education Commission paper shows officials are more worried about the National Polytechnic's long-term plans than its multi-million-dollar deficits. The June briefing to Education Minister Jan Tinetti says Te Pukenga's financial situation had worsened and was classed as high risk. It said falling enrolments left its campuses with fewer students than they had before the pandemic began. Enrolments in work-based learning had fallen too. However, the report also said the Institute had a strong balance sheet and good access to money. It said the Institute was looking for ways to reduce this year's deficit, but it needed to plan how it would return to financial sustainability. Doctors in Australia have described the moment they found a parasitic worm wriggling inside a patient's brain. The woman was being treated for a mysterious infectious illness. The BBC's Phil Mercer reports.
The light red worm was alive and wriggling when it was pulled from the patient's brain. Scientists at the Australian National University believe it could have been there for a couple of months. The 64-year-old woman had complained of stomach pains, diarrhoea and depression. A scan revealed an abnormality in her brain. Researchers say the surgical team had the shock of their lives when they found the 8-centimetre-long parasite that's common to carpet pythons. They warn that the case highlights the increased danger of diseases and infections being passed from animals to people. The patient is recovering well.
Mystery surrounds the appearance of a stylised skull carved into the sandstone cliffs at Waipipi Beach near Waverley in South Taranaki. The creation is reminiscent of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards' famous skull rings, or for millennials, the equivalent emoji. Local resident Ralph Jellett admits it's a bit out of place.
It looks okay from what I see of it, but I mean, it's strange to have it down on our beach, I have to say. It's not the sort of thing I would do.
Ralph Jellett says it won't be long before the 2 metre by 2 metre sculpture erodes away. The South Taranaki District Council says technically the skull triggers the need for a consent under the district plan. It encourages other artists to come and have a chat before embarking on any large-scale ideas within the coastal protection area. A study in the United States has found that playing Mozart's lullaby to newborn babies can reduce the pain they experience while undergoing a heel prick blood test. The researchers in New York measured pain levels of 100 babies who underwent the routine screening tests. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. 9 to Noon's 2023 short story competition is now open. We're looking for stories of 2,000 words. The top 5 winners, chosen by our judges Harry Ricketts and Tina Makareti, will be adapted for radio and broadcast on 9 to Noon in November. We've had a terrific response the last couple of years and look forward to this year's entries. So if you're 16 or over and your story hasn't been published before, have a go. Entries close on September the 29th. For details, go to our webpage or to rnz.co.nz/short story and stay tuned to 9 to Noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine today. Isolated light showers in Northland. Showers spreading south tomorrow morning. Some heavy, possibly thundery, mainly near eastern coasts. Waikato and Bay of Plenty mainly fine with overnight frosts. Scattered showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country and Gisborne through to Wairarapa. Also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine with overnight frosts in many places. Patches of early fog tomorrow. Areas of cloud from Horowhenua to Wellington tomorrow, spreading to Marlborough and Nelson in the evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, also Stewart Island mainly fine, but showers about Fiordland and Stewart Island. Isolated showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Otago and Southland, isolated showers clearing this evening. Fine tomorrow with early frosts. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with occasional showers. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Thank you, Susanna. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. After 6 months of waiting, dozens of Muriwai residents have been given the news no one wanted. Your property might be bought out, but it might not. Residents will tonight be able to vent their frustrations at a public meeting with council officials after 42 of the 69 high-risk Muriwai properties were left in limbo. Category 3 means the property will be bought out. 2 means it can be saved with safety improvements. The majority are in 2/3, which means, well, who knows? Reporter Tom Taylor and camera operator Nick Monroe have more.
The Muriwai Lodge, known to locals as the Top Shop, has been a mainstay of the community for 100 years. But they had to evacuate as Cyclone Gabrielle brought landslides through the section.
So here there was an amenities block that had 4 showers and 4 toilets and a kitchen and a laundry. Concrete block, it's somewhere over there.
So that's been swept at least, 30, 40 metres down the hill?
Yeah, and destroyed in the process.
Cabins now teeter over the edge of a cliff. Neighbours' cars lie wrecked after rolling down the hill above, and the whole area is littered with debris and silt. Despite this scene of ruin, owner Claire Bradley's been given permission to move back into the lodge while she clears up the rest of the property.
There's the old placard. It was first white, and then they changed their mind and made it red, and now it's gone to yellow, so we've had all the colours.
Claire's still coming to terms with the sheer volume of work ahead of her, but incredibly, she's optimistic about the site's future. We're here on Motutara Road at the base of the first devastating slip to hit the community of Muriwai more than 6 months ago. The slip tragically taking the lives of 2 local firefighters. Now, while this land may never be rebuilt on again, just across the road here at the Muriwai Lodge in Delhi, they've finally been given the all clear that they need to start to rebuild and become the community hub they once were. The council yesterday contacted the owners of 69 high-risk properties. 3 of them have been placed into Category 2, which could see owners return to their homes after any risks are resolved. A further 24 have been deemed unsafe to live in and assigned Category 3, meaning they'll likely be offered buyouts. Lachlan McKinven's house is on Motutara Road and one of 42 properties that have been classified as Category 2/3.
That's really not the news that I was hoping for. I was hoping that we would get told that we could go home.
Lachlan's been toughing it out in the caravan with his 5-year-old daughter all through winter.
Things like doing your laundry, washing dishes, cooking a meal in the caravan, everything just takes so much longer. And it's fun when you camp for a couple of weeks, but it's quite tough when you try to live, in a single room for for 6 months or more.
He says receiving an unresolved category is worse even than Category 3.
That would break our hearts to lose our home, but at least we would have some closure and we would know what was coming next. A Category 2/3 is sort of like saying we just need to wait longer, and I feel like that's all we've been doing.
Although his house is just 100 metres away from the Muruwai Lodge, there are no slips directly affecting it. He says the council suggested the house could be moved further from the slope at the back of the property, but this won't be straightforward.
It's a 70-year-old house with a concrete floor. I just don't know how feasible it is to pick a house like that up. Bigger questions, like who pays for that? Because I don't have a budget to relocate my house.
Questions he'll be taking up with the council tonight as Muruwai residents gather at the surf club to voice their concerns about decisions that will determine their future.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, check out the video version. We'll put it on our webpage. Some of you have been getting in touch about this. Our earlier conversation with Maurice Williamson, who's on the Council's Finance Committee, they'll be deciding what kind of formula is used to determine value. It'll go to the full Council for a vote. This listener, Cleo, says, so Maurice revealed his true motivation, like for like. It's actually all about reducing the financial impact, not about doing the right thing by people. Someone else has got in touch to say, what I cannot understand is why there is not a buyout system between local and national governments and insurance, because already, given the past earthquakes and disasters. Another person says, I feel for those people affected by the floods and waiting for direction. I lost my home in Christchurch after the 2011 quake and waited in limbo for 18 months before getting a classification of red zone. Only then was I able to start making plans to move towards getting another home, a terribly frustrating and difficult time that I hope no one affected by the floods will have to go through. Thank you for your feedback. After an extraordinary saga which has overshadowed Spain's Women's World Cup win, the country's ruling football body has asked the president of the Football Federation to quit. We have all seen the pictures of Luis Rubiales grabbing Jenny Hermosa and kissing her firmly on the lips during the presentation ceremony in Sydney. Prosecutors have now launched a preliminary investigation into whether the incident is sexual assault, and players are refusing to represent the national team. The ABC's Steve Canane reports.
Spain should be celebrating its women's victory in the World Cup. Instead, the country is embroiled in what's being described as its own Me Too moment. After his forced kiss on the lips of star striker Jenny Hermoso sparked widespread anger, Luis Rubiales told a meeting of Spain's Football Federation he would not resign.
No voy a dimitir.
That statement and the applause that followed has angered Yolanda Diaz, Spain's second Deputy Prime Minister. She wants Rubiales to go and the way that sport is governed to change.
Last Friday, I think we saw the worst of Spanish society when Mr. Rubiales and many other men applauded and made fun of someone who they were obliged to protect, according to Article 29 of the sports law, by the spirit of the sports law. And instead of protecting her, what they did instead was give her more pain and suffering and even put her in a more dangerous situation.
Spain's government has begun legal proceedings to suspend Rubiales as president, and his own federation has been meeting into the night to discuss his future, with prosecutors now looking into whether the unwanted kiss constituted sexual assault. The football president is under increased pressure to step down. Hundreds of people have gathered in the centre of Madrid, waving purple women's rights placards and calling on Rubiales to quit. But the mother of the football chief has begun her own protest, starting a hunger strike inside the Church of the Divine Shepherdess in Granada, highlighting what she's described as the inhumane and bloody persecution of her son. His cousin Vanessa Ruiz Bejar described the mother's hunger strike as logical and normal.
She could get sick, but she's his mother, and mothers know when their son is being treated unfairly and is being attacked. It's normal for a mother as faithful as she is to ask God for help. A point comes when you're overtaken with desperation and you don't know where else to look. It's logical and normal.
FIFA has already suspended Rubiales for 3 months, and with the national team due to play Sweden next month, they may not be able to find 11 decent players unless the president decides to quit.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As the war in Ukraine rages on, people are trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Beachgoers have returned to the Black Sea coastal town of Odessa long after the start of the Russian invasion stopped activity in the city. CNN's Christiane Amanpour reports.
In the waning days of a second summer at war, under the blazing Black Sea sun, you find, well, people at the beach. It's actually the first time some of this Odessa coastline has been open for business since the Russian invasion. And while Olga has brought her family for a change of scenery, there is no getting away from it. Here, can you forget the war for a little bit?
Sirens at night don't let you forget. No, we don't forget. At least I don't. But I hope my kids and parents get distracted a little bit.
Still, those who can make the most of it. Life goes on even in wartime. And here at the Calaton Beach Club, it's somehow comforting to watch parents slap protective gear onto their infants as if sunburn is the worst that can happen. But of course, it's not. So does that mean orthopedics or anything? 15 minutes away in the centre of town is a modern private recovery and rehabilitation unit, one of 10 set up around the country by a Ukrainian philanthropist. Here, in a full-body sling, 41-year-old Vitaly tells us that he volunteered for the front as a D-miner until he was blown up by an anti-personnel mine 8 months ago in Kherson. The first wave hit my face because I was bending down, he says, and shrapnel entered my eye, another bit hit my finger, and 3 of my toes were blown off. On the rehab bed next to him, 43-year-old Ruslan's injury is less dramatic, spine and back problems from suddenly having to haul heavy gear around. Do you need to get into better shape? If I was 20, he tells me, it would be different, but I'm 43 and so it's difficult. But he wants to go back to the front like Vitaly does just as soon as they're patched up. Still motivated, still sure of victory. But then the talk suddenly turns. Vitaly, what do you think you need? Immobilized and prone, he's crystal clear. We need more weapons and jets to close the sky from the Russian missiles, he says. When a soldier is fighting there and his family is here unprotected, what do you think goes through our minds? Andrei tells me his psychological trauma is worse than the shrapnel to his hand because he, like all of them, want to be back at the front with their comrades to fight for their country and their family.
Mama.
I have a mother, a father, a wife, and a cat, he tells me. Back at the seaside, Sergei, a 59-year-old conscript based in Kherson, defends his beach-time break. In the middle of war, you don't feel strange?
Yeah, it looks like a little bit strange, but we need some relaxing.
He'll be back under arms after his 15-day furlough, and he insists their counter-offensive is going according to plan.
To Italy now, where the government is expected to devise an emergency plan this week in response to the country's migrant crisis. The Red Cross says more than 4,000 migrants arrived on the island of Lampedusa alone on Sunday. The number of migrants that arrive in Italy this year has doubled compared to the same period last year. CNN's Barbie Naidu reports.
It's the height of the Mediterranean summer, and this tiny island is overwhelmed with the arrival of thousands of migrants and refugees. More than 4,000 people arrived on the Italian island of Lampedusa in hundreds of small boats over the weekend. Among them, pregnant women, babies, and unaccompanied minors. It's the highest number of arrivals in a weekend this island has ever seen. More than 113,000 people have arrived in Italy by boat this year. That's more than the total number that arrived in all of 2022. There may be more migrant and refugee boats at sea, but there are fewer NGOs to rescue them. At the moment, the Italian government has sequestered 3 NGO ships for allegedly breaking a law set by Italy's right-wing government under Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni that mandates how many rescues a charity ship can carry out. Each of the sequestered ships will be docked for 20 days and fined up to €10,000. 56 organizations have signed a petition against the government, accusing them of obstructing civilian search and rescue and warning that it will lead to more deaths. But the Italian government says without the rest of Europe helping, they cannot manage the influx.
Italy can't be left alone facing this extraordinary phenomenon. Italy is the gateway to Europe. Europe must intervene with us.
Meloni will lead crisis talks this week after the government reconvenes. On the agenda, ways to help people migrate legally and ways to deport them faster. In the meantime, the boats keep coming and coming and coming.
It's been revealed the Australian government supported Qantas by blocking Qatar Airways' request for more flights into the country. It's drawn criticism from many quarters and raised questions about whether the government may have breached international aviation law. The ABC's Flint Duxfield reports.
Kangaroo Island in South Australia is the kind of destination people come from all over the world to see, and the cost of international flights has a big impact on the local economy. Tourism operator Craig Wickham runs exceptional Kangaroo Island. He says before the bushfires and COVID, more than 90% of his clients were foreign tourists. But right now, the cost and availability of flights is a big problem.
What tends to happen is people will have a budget for their trip, and if the airline pricing is double what it was, which is the case at the moment for most of our clients, then a larger portion of that budget gets gobbled up in the airfare, and that leaves less to spend on the ground.
Craig Wickham believes Australia desperately needs more competition to bring prices down. He was taken aback by the government's decision to block Qatar Airways' bid to introduce more flights to Australia, and he thinks it points to the influence Qantas has over the government.
Yeah, I'm fairly pragmatic. I just think that just gives us a fairly good illustration of the very close-knit relationships that exist at the moment, and I think we can do better with a little bit of liberalisation. It just seems that they're looking after themselves perhaps more than the broader industry.
It's a view shared by Shadow Finance Minister Senator Jane Hume. She says Transport Minister Catherine King's decision to block Qatar Airways' request to add a further 21 flights into Australia looks like a deliberate attempt to bolster Qantas and keep prices higher for longer.
An organisation like Qantas that runs essentially almost as a monopoly, or at least in a highly uncompetitive market, has a social contract with the government that allows it to keep that almost monopoly status. We would expect that the government would give Qantas its marching orders and make sure that it knows that competition is just around the corner.
In a comment to the Australian Financial Review, Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones explained that the decision to block the extra Qatar flights was made to protect Qantas's viability.
We always want to ensure we're doing things to drive down the cost of airline tickets in Australia, but we want to ensure that we do that in a way that doesn't destroy the industry over the medium and long term.
But that rationale is being questioned by aviation experts.
The viability of the airline is an important thing, but it has to run as a business. We can't sit around saying, every time an Australian company doesn't look viable, we should make sure there's no competition for it.
Dr Ian Douglas from the University of Wollongong is a former chair of the Australian International Air Services Commission, which determines the routes and capacity airlines are allowed to fly.
I find it particularly puzzling, given that Qatar Airways is not competing in the space that Qantas competes. The Qantas operations to Europe were handed over effectively to a business partner in Emirates plenty of years ago. And there are Australian traffic rights to places in Europe that aren't being used by an Australian carrier, not just Qantas, but any Australian carrier. They just sit there dormant now. And we've got this situation where effectively Qantas is being protected from a competitor who is not competing with them to Europe.
3 US Marines remain in a Darwin hospital after the crash of an Osprey helicopter during a weekend training exercise. 3 of their colleagues were killed and authorities are working to recover their bodies. Authorities also say it's remarkable that 20 of the 23 of those on board survived. But questions are being asked about the future use of the hybrid aircraft, with crashes causing more than 50 deaths in its 30-year history. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
We are just declaring an emergency on behalf of Dump 111.
Radio traffic control captured the immediate aftermath of the crash on Melville Island off Darwin.
Duck Type 33, search and rescue is requesting if there's fire. Hey, firm, there's a significant fire.
With the military aircraft on fire and 23 people on board, Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles noted the quick response of emergency crews, which most likely saved lives. And Americans have been absorbing the news.
To Australia now, where there was a deadly crash today involving U.S. Marines.
Tonight, a military aircraft similar to this one at the...
But it's not the first time the Osprey has crashed and claimed lives in Australia and elsewhere. During another training exercise in 2017, 3 US airmen died off Rockhampton, one of at least 12 crashes around the world. Here's retired US Air Force Colonel Cedric Layton.
About 51 people before this crash, about 51 people have died in Osprey-related accidents since the aircraft was first introduced in the late 1980s as a prototype.
The causes vary from a pilot struggling to land safely to problems with the aircraft's hydraulics and a software anomaly. The Osprey is a unique cross between a helicopter and a plane, with wings and rotors that can tilt and fold for storage on an aircraft carrier. It's also 5 times faster than other helicopters.
The aircraft itself has some very unique capabilities, and it is very useful for getting into certain areas where you have a short landing area or a difficult landing area. So it's very useful from that standpoint.
With safety improvements, he believes the helicopter will stay in service. And one theory behind the Osprey's hefty fatality record comes down to its capacity to carry more people. Keith Tonkin flew F-111s during his 15 years of service with the Australian Air Force.
It was designed for a very specific task, and that was to fly to places where we don't have a prepared runway or helicopter landing site. Even if it's just an open area, it can land and take off and then fly quite a way and carry quite a few people.
Dr Graham Wild has pored over the statistics associated with various military aircraft accidents. He's an aeronautical engineering program coordinator with the Australian Defence Force Academy.
If you look at the accident rates the Americans have had with their Chinooks and the accident rates with the Ospreys, they're both about 3 per 100,000 hours.
And he too believes the hybrid helicopter has an operational future in the US military.
An ornately carved 11-metre tall totem pole, one of the biggest displays at the National Museum of Scotland, will be returned to Canada. Indigenous researchers in British Columbia say the artefact was originally stolen and sold to the museum more than a century ago without the consent of local people. The BBC's Katie Hunter has the story.
This is a historic moment. People from the Niska Nation at the National Museum of Scotland to prepare their totem pole for the journey home.
Off and all, today was probably one of the most happy days in my life, because I'm really, really emotional right now, and I could feel my ancestral grandmother.
The Niska people believe this memorial pole is alive with the spirit of their ancestors. They say it was stolen almost 100 years ago from the Nass Valley and sold to what's now National Museums Scotland. An agreement to return it was reached last December. The totem pole will need to be brought out of the museum through a window in the middle of the night before being flown back to British Columbia by the Canadian military.
I'm really pleased that the pole will be returning to its home where its spiritual, cultural and historical significance is most keenly felt, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to use our procedure to work with the family to be able to help make this happen.
Mr. William Moore, if you will open our gathering.
The Niska people say this is a significant moment of reconciliation. They hope the world is watching.
That's us, but be tuning in tomorrow 5 a.m. for First Up. Christopher Luxon reckons he spent a bit of time in Otara in his botany electorate, so First Up pays it a visit too.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Nationals promising its tax plan, being unveiled tomorrow, won't make inflation worse, won't increase debt and will help the squeezed middle. National MP Chris Bishop says Parliament should be a place where all feel safe to work. Mr Bishop says censured Waikato National MP Tim van der Molen crossed the line when he was found to have threatened Labour's Shannon Halbert. Washington is giving Japan the green light to buy up to 50 surface-to-air missiles in a deal worth more than $100 million. And emergency services have now isolated a gas leak in Auckland's Takapuna. Police and a fire crew were called to Kalani Street this afternoon, and cordons were put in place. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow, it's the most famous zebra crossing anywhere in the world, the one on Abbey Road in St John's Wood, London. What began life as an affluent suburban house is now considered one of the greatest recording studios in the world. And legendary music journalist David Hepworth documents the 90-plus year history of music's hallowed ground, including a Kiwi's key role in breathing new life into old recordings. He joins me on afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow on RNZ National.
Time now